Are they gone? All right, I think it's safe to talk about compare words. I'll be right back. Just like it's important to be able to tell the difference between things, it can be really important to tell how things are similar or alike. So we're looking at words that compare so that we can do that when we're talking and we're writing. Let's take a look at a couple examples of words that we use to compare things. We're going to start with both, because both is kind of a classic. Everybody uses both to describe things that are similar. Let's take a look at it used in a sentence. You can always tell a teacher's videos are getting close to dinner time when it starts sounding something like this. Both tortillas and cornbread are made from corn. Delicious. This is a comparison between two things based on what they're made out of. So using both here is good because you'd be like, oh, well, this and this are both made out of that same thing. Good food made out of the same good stuff. Sorry if this video is getting a little too corny for you. It's important to recognize that when we compare things, we're not talking about how they're exactly the same normally, because, of course, exactly the same means it's the same thing. You don't have to compare a thing to itself, an apple and an apple. They're both apples. When we want to talk about two things that are alike, similarly is a good word because it can talk about how they're almost the same or kind of close to being the same, with still a little bit of difference in there. Let's take a look at an example. Here's an example of similarly used in a sentence. Many types of hair braids are both stylish and have roots in cultural heritage. Similarly, popular music styles usually borrow from older, more traditional songs. So you can see music and hair don't really have any obvious connection, but when you think about it, they're not the same at all, but they have similarities in that they both take root in history, right? You trace it back. You say, well, right now, some people might just look at this as a style or a fad or a trend, but it traces its roots back to some kind of heritage that had deeper meaning. Let's look at some ways to use the word also. It's a pretty common word to hear, but there's a couple different ways you can use it to compare. So our first example here, salsa is a type of dance that is popular in Latin countries. Tango is also a type of Latin dance. So here we're using it to compare two types of dance that both have their same origin, right? They both come from the same places. All right, maybe not the exact same place, but spread throughout the Latin world, right? South America and Spain and Mexico. All right, salsa is a type of dance that is popular in Latin countries. Tango is also a type of Latin dance. All right, here's another example. Also can be used this way. He is on the basketball team and in drama club. I also do more than one thing. You don't specify what, but you get the idea. Okay, this person does two things. I also do two things, or more than one thing at least. All right, so also can be used a couple different ways. In common, when you talk about people having similarities, we talk about finding common ground. All right, common just can mean it's not rare, but common can also mean two things that groups or people share, all right, or things share. So let's talk about how we can use that. This one's a little bit of an ironic example since that just talks about common ground, but here's a sentence. One thing my sister and I have in common is that we can't stand each other, right? Weird that one thing we'd have in common is our mutual dislike for one another. Don't actually have a sister. This is fiction. But one thing my sister and I have in common is that we can't stand each other shows how in one sentence you can kind of just give something that two things share without going into a lot of detail. And to finish up, the only thing that penguins and polar bears have in common is that they eat fish. That's actually not true. I meant to change that to one thing that penguins and polar bears have in common is they eat fish. I'm sure somebody's being like, but Mr. Meyer, they also live in the cold. That's another thing they have in common. Plus, they both lived in the Arctic Circle. Plus, they got white furry stuff on them because polar bears have white fur. Okay, yeah, I get it. They have a bunch of stuff in common. Mr. Meyer, go change that. So it says the only thing that, let's say, one thing that penguins and polar bears have in common is that they eat fish. Of course, polar bears also eat penguins, right? So wrapping that up, there are a bunch of different words to compare. Those aren't the only ones, but those are just a couple examples of words you can use to show comparison or similarities, likenesses between two different things, how they're alike, what they have in common, all right? So I hope that's useful. Take care.